A Journey into the World of the Insane. A Morning Glory Trip Report by Queek. Posted to Irrwid.org, February 25th, 2007. I suppose I should start with my history, to help bring you into my mind. My most extensive psychoactive substance experience has been with marijuana, for a little over 4 years now. I've consumed alcohol, but extremely infrequently, perhaps 10 times in my entire life. This past 2 years I've delved into the world of magic, and an important part of that world seemed to be psychedelics and hallucinogens. The true hallucinogens, mandrake, datura, nightshade, henbane, etc., interested me greatly, but I wisely decided to begin with psychedelics, LSD, peyote, oliqui, mushrooms, etc., to expand my mind so I would be prepared to truly hallucinate. I began with a few salvia sessions, one intense but short Kalia dream last night, and a very light but absolutely wonderful mushroom trip at the end of summer. After that I had no access to anything illegal besides marijuana for 6 months, so I looked into the legal drugs. Nutmeg was readily available, and I experimented extensively upon myself and others with that incredibly powerful substance. After that came a few DXM trips. Never more than a 4-ounce bottle of Robitussin maximum strength cough though. And finally, after discovering that morning glory seeds were similar to LSD, and also available at any store, I decided to give them a try as well. It took quite a while to remember to look for them, but once I did, it was a simple $10 purchase away. My first experiment was ill-informed. I ate 1.5 grams of flying saucer seeds whole, but mixed with applesauce for some reason. I think I chewed at least most of them a little bit, but they had almost no effect, or at least no noticeable one other than a bit of nausea. My second experiment was only half as ill-informed. I ground 9 grams of pearly gate seeds up in a coffee grinder, then put them in cold water mixed with some pure lemon juice, and let them sit in the refrigerator for an hour or so. I left the seed mush in, and it settled into 3 layers, one light greenish, one darker green and yellow with small chunks, and one greyish with most of the seed chunks. At 3 PM, I started to drink it. I made it through the first layer and a little bit of the second before the taste made me feel nauseous. The mix of lemon juice and the seeds was awful to say the least. After this I had a sickening feeling in my stomach which did not go away for the rest of the night. This was accompanied by a body high that was more like a body low. I felt like I had seasickness, even though I've never really had seasickness before. I just assumed that this is what it feels like. I vomited perhaps 4 times in my whole life, always from extreme sickness. Within 45 minutes of drinking the morning glory seed water, I barely made it to the toilet in time to puke up everything I've ever eaten in my whole life, and then some. Ugh, a miserable feeling indeed. And the trip wasn't a trip, it was mostly just a body feeling. I decided that next time I would do the ritual fasting, eat ginger, and smoke a small amount of marijuana as precautions against the intense nausea. My third, and I believe successful trip went as follows. On Thursday I thoroughly washed 9 grams of heavenly blue morning glory seeds with Dawn dishwashing liquid in a colander, and then rinsed those 9 grams extremely thoroughly, but being careful not to let the seeds soak at all. I then set them on a paper towel under the stove fan to dry. After 30 minutes or so, they were dry, and I ground them up in a coffee bean grinder. After collecting 99% of the powder, I transferred it to a large cup which I had filled with applesauce. I stirred it in thoroughly so that it was well mixed, and then I left it in my refrigerator. This was at approximately noon. From then on, I did not eat anything that day. I stayed up late, and went to sleep rather tired. At 11:30 AM on Friday, I awoke and rather spontaneously decided to consume the applesauce at noon. I took a shower and cleansed myself, got dressed in comfortable clothes, and went downstairs. I drank the applesauce infusion of morning glory seeds at noon, as I had decided 30 minutes before. I was alone, and would be up until 4 PM or so, at which point I would be with my family for the rest of the evening. This was not the best setting to be in while tripping, and my mindset was reasonable, although not the best either. But like I said, it was a spontaneous decision, and nothing drastic had happened during my last 2 experiments. So at noon, I ate a small amount of raw dried ginger root, gross stuff I must say, and then ate the applesauce, which 98% masked the seed taste. Very good. It's not a nauseating taste to me. Sometime within the next hour I noticed I was a bit giggly at the computer, and I was thinking a bit oddly, which isn't unusual for me, but it was noticeable. Approximately 1 PM, I felt disoriented and kind of like, what the fuck is going on right now? But not really in that much of a bad way. I stumbled out to the garage to smoke a small quantity of marijuana, and I mean really small, like a quarter of a bowl, still mostly in control of my thoughts and actions. I wandered back inside after getting semi-lost walking around my house because all of the doors were locked except for the original one I had exited from. I stepped in mud and got kind of confused as to how to deal with this unpleasant mini-crisis. I ended up brushing most of it off in the grass in my front yard and stumbling back into the house. I felt somewhat in a fog and had nausea, but it was minor, thanks to the weed mostly. I was bored, but in a kind of depressed way. I craved social interaction and knew that there was none to be had. I wanted to be with someone else who was tripping, but no one was. I couldn't even tell anyone I was tripping. But nobody would be there to tell for 4 hours anyway. For most of those 4 hours I felt slightly nauseous, but it was minimal, and I felt no desire or need to puke, especially if I lay down in one spot for a while. I decided watching a movie would be great for keeping me entertained while I lay down and wait for the nausea to dissipate. I put not another teen movie on. I lay down on the couch and watched it. It took about an hour longer than it should have because I would rewind at every scene at some point because I wanted to check if things I'd seen in the background were real. They were. And during the musical number, I rewound it and watched it at least 10 times, maybe more. Because one part was absolutely hilarious, and one part was beautiful. By the time the movie was done, my family was almost home. I was feeling extremely spaced out and foggy, and I spent an hour laying on the couch looking at the wall and ceilings, which now had patterns on them. Not particularly trippy patterns, but very obvious, noticeable, realistic patterns, which changed over the course of the day, depending on what I was thinking about. Also, the sun shining through the window made a tiny rainbow on the wall, a prism effect, which was incredibly cool and interesting to me. Things got a bit harder to deal with when I had to interact with people. When my family finally got home around 4, my mind was fully transformed into the brain of someone who is clinically insane. I felt like my thought had been changed from mostly linear to mostly random. I could follow conversations somewhat, but my insights and comments were random and off the wall to everyone else. They made sense, but the path I followed to get to my conclusions was completely erratic. The jokes I made were funny, but only to me, because half of the joke was something I was thinking about at the time. I solved this problem of sounding like an insane person whenever I opened my mouth by not talking as much as possible. The simplest comments like, "Thank you," were odd and awkward sounding to me, so I tried to avoid people. Most of the time I felt like I was watching the world from about 10 feet behind my eyes, and I could reconnect when I needed to, but I was still a bit distanced from typical reality. The whole time I felt alone and was somewhat depressed that I didn't have anyone to share this experience with. I thought a lot about the fact that I didn't have any huge passion in life or definite direction to go. Normally this is liberating to me, but the morning glory seeds liberated my mind so much that it wanted and needed something solid to anchor it. I had nothing. No solid goal, no driving purpose. And when I was lost in the land of infinity that my Friday night had become, this was scary and depressing. It is definitely a daytime drug, unlike shrooms. I've never actually used a sitter, but I have tripped with people and I enjoy it immensely, being a very social person. By about 8 PM, I was ready to go to sleep just to escape the madness. Literally, I had gone crazy, but not extremely crazy, and I knew it. I didn't want to be crazy alone, and it was unpleasant as hell to know that until I was done being crazy, I was alone. Truly alone. Because the thing that binds us together as a society is the fact that generally, we think alike. We assume at least some of the same things, and act usually in the same way in response to stimuli. Well, I was off in another world, thinking much differently from anyone around me, with all the oddities of behaviour that this entails. I wanted to go to sleep and wake up sane again, with some kind of self-certainty about my life path. Once in bed, I noticed something which was absent, aside from the wall and ceiling patterns, during the light part of the trip. In mostly darkness, things began to have colours that I knew weren't their real colours. It was subtle, but my walls were bluish and greenish, and a poster I have of a black and white fingerprint began pulsing and swirling in a subtle manner as well. The colours swirled a bit too, and the ceiling patterns gained some colours at this point as well. I believe I began to notice the colours because of the minimal light, and the colours were by no means bright or vibrant. As a matter of fact, they reminded me of the voices I heard while under the influence of Salvia Divinorum. I didn't really hear the voices, I just knew in my mind that the voices existed, and what they were saying. In the same manner, I knew that there were colours, and my eyes tried to catch up and show me these colours, but it wasn't a vibrant or intense knowledge, so the colours were subtle. It was interesting nonetheless though, since I've yet to try LSD or have enough mushrooms to truly alter the colours and perspective much, and yet the morning glory seeds did this, albeit only minorly. I woke up at 3 in the morning, which was the first time I knew I'd fallen asleep. My thoughts had slipped into hypnagogia, and my hypnagogia into dreams. So I woke up at 3, rather surprised that I'd been asleep. I checked my eyes in the mirror, and they weren't dilated anymore, but I still felt a bit off baseline, kind of an after effect. I went back to sleep and woke up the next morning feeling better, but with the knowledge burnt into my head that this was a trip that I should take with friends and during the day next time. The best way to describe what I felt like during the whole trip was insane. Not minorly so either, but severely insane. I was crazy. I had taken a trip into a world of madness from which I could not escape. The world appeared so simple and yet so unfathomably complex to me. I was crazy, and I knew it. Morning glory seeds are not a toy, and I got the feeling during the trip that the spirit contained in the seed experience is an old and harsh one. It was definitely male, with 2 sides. He is hell on my stomach and body. But the mental voyage is fantastic. It is not hard to gain entrance into the world of oliloquy. It simply requires intelligence.
Elixir of Transcendence. A Hawaiian baby woodrose, calamus, carver, chaseberries and cannabis trip report by Daedalus, uploaded to earwid.org June 16th, 2009. Body weight, 180 pounds. This experience took place at a drive-in movie theatre and various parking lots. It is important to note that I was not driving on this night, as my good friend S offered to take the wheel. The preparation was simple and legal. I scraped and crushed 9 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds with a pair of pliers and a sheet of paper, and sealed the coarse powder in 2 capsules. The carver was from a health food store, and consisted of pure, untreated root powder. The calamus root and chase tree berries arrived in the mail already powdered, and all of these encapsulated. Hawaiian baby woodrose, 9 seeds in 2 caps. Calamus, 5 grams in 4 caps. Carver, 6 grams in 5 caps, and chaseberry, 3 grams in 2 caps. Also, I took 2 capsules of crushed milk thistle seed. These have no psychoactive effect, but are good for cleansing the liver and blood of the toxins which cause the trip. I've been experimenting with these, and other herbal consciousness expanders for 2 years. This formula has been achieved through trial and error, and I am very satisfied with this latest iteration. The Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds contain LSA, which is the plainer cousin of LSD. For me, the effects always come on as a vague set of bodily sensations, starting in the stomach and heart area, then flowing up into the eyes and back of the head. The feeling resembles a psychic erotic tension, a combination of bodily and perceptual heightening. It was hard to notice, and harder to describe during my first experiments with LSA. The calamus acts as a stimulant and has a spicy taste which reappears in frequent burps. Kava is a socializing drug which brings out feelings of empathy and a kind of outward flowing consciousness. Chaseberry contains a chemical which binds to the brain's dopamine receptors, making for a more pleasant, euphoric experience. This night, the experience built to a peak which I had not encountered before. While the movies played across the screens, I became more relaxed and euphoric, while nausea was held easily at bay with cannabis inhalation. My visual effects were closed-eyed by this point, and they amounted to a separate, entirely private movie playing on my eyelids. I could visualise anything I wanted, in perfect clarity, and I'd be able to see it before my third eye in high-definition omnicolour. For a period, I had control over the images, and I played with various ideations and fantasies, until I came upon a startling and terrifying notion. I considered the experience of the last man on Earth, what he might experience on his dying day. Suddenly it struck me that, at the moment at which the last man or woman on Earth dies, he or she will not be aware of that fact. Since the extinction of mankind assumes a breakdown in communication, the news of man's extinction would not be known by anyone. Barring a very unlikely occurrence in which the Earth is destroyed all at once, except for a few people who witness the event, the extinction of mankind will never be consciously known by anyone. It's hard to describe now, a week afterward, but at the time, it was horrifying beyond description. My friend helped to calm me down, but I was still feeling disturbed as we left the theatre. I wasn't in the mood to return home yet, but we had no more cash for more entertainment, so we just parked in the lot of a Walmart, which is still busy in the middle of the night, so that we could sit for another hour without being noticed or pulled over and arrested. While we sat listening to Spongle and watching rain slide down the windshield, I began to have open-eye visual distortions. Everything took on the appearance of watery distortion, like the rain sliding down the glass, and the outside world was a kaleidoscopic array of bright colours and lights, split through the prisms of water droplets. The world was a bright stereoscopic vision, and only I saw it as this. I ended up becoming transfixed by this new idea, that I, among all the world, was the only person having this experience at this moment. And this made me... what? It was this moment which classified this trip as a level 4 entheogenic experience. I was struck by the realization that I was alone in a universe of my own imagination, a dream world, created by the dreamer, in which I would relive every moment of every human life, in endless configurations and emotional states, and with every range of experience imaginable. In short, I was God, the universal awareness, expressed through every human being as a different individual, because the prismatic effects of space-time split the Godhead into a legion of individual observers, each capable of assuming an individual identity. This was not a moment of solipsism, in which I discovered that I was God Almighty, Master of the Universe, but rather that I am a humble cell in a cosmic entity into which I will reassimilate when I die, and from which I will again split away, to live again and again and again and again and again, ad infinitum. I was stunned, and had enormous difficulty explaining this to S as she drove me back to my apartment. I still haven't come to terms with it, as it was too powerful and affirmative to ignore, yet also too startling to easily accept. I look forward to repeating this experience, with the hope that I may continue to explore the transcendental state which I attained. So this report today was sent in by a subscriber called Joe Barmer, and this details his experience with Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds and cannabis. So if you don't know, the active chemical in Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds is LSA. I've done a trip report on LSA before, so if you're curious about the effects of it, I implore you to look it up. Reliving my childhood with Hawaiian baby woodrose. This was my third and definitely most intense experience I've had with LSA. My past experiences have been nothing more than extreme nausea, followed by a heavy body load and mild psychedelia. Granted, before this experience I had only done a dose as high as only 6 seeds. This experience, however, has completely reshaped how I perceive memory. I woke up on an August morning to bad weather and nothing to do. So I decided to grab my stash of Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds and try a higher dose than usual. I shaved down 15 seeds and chewed them up thoroughly, holding them under my tongue for about 20 minutes. After about 10 minutes of holding in the seeds, I started to feel the onset of nausea, and right at the 20-minute mark I rushed to the bathroom and vomited, spitting the seed gunk out. After recovering and brushing my teeth, I started to feel the onset strongly, but still retained some pretty uncomfortable nausea, but it was bearable. I decided to walk outside to sit on my back porch and smoke some weed to help calm the nausea. As I sat outside puffing on a joint, I began to notice how detailed everything seemed. The plants seemed to be giving off a slight aura or glow and became extremely alive looking. As I was outside studying the details of the plants in my yard, I became extremely euphoric and energetic as the nausea wore off. This was around the 1 hour mark since I took the seeds. As I stood up to go inside, I noticed a heavy body load caused by the vasoconstriction from the seeds, but it did not bother me in any way. It was actually quite a pleasant feeling. Once I got inside, I felt as if my body wasn't there, and I was just a floating head going around my house. This was somewhat unsettling to me, but I simply reminded myself of what I took, and proceeded to grab a glass of milk since I hadn't eaten anything that morning. I downed the milk and noticed that it felt much colder than usual, and I could feel it travel all the way down to my stomach, making my whole body feel cold. This cold feeling stayed consistent throughout the rest of the trip. It's now around the 1 hour and 45-minute mark of the trip, and I noticed another wave of nausea coming on, so I decided to walk myself over to my couch and lie down to relax myself. As I lay there, the textured ceiling in my living room began to shift slightly, and repeat a single pattern from a particular spot that I would focus on. I laid there for maybe 45 minutes just playing with these mild visuals, which were really intriguing to me since this was the first time I had ever experienced visuals from LSA. Once I came to the realization that my nausea was completely gone, I shot up from the couch quickly with a burst of energy, and noticed how hungry I really was. I made myself a hot pocket, and the whole time it was cooking I paced around the house with a huge smile on my face, just scrolling through random apps on my phone. My phone appeared to be much bigger in my hands, and this was very amusing to me. I stopped pacing and started to inspect my phone and its case, very intently for a short time. This was until I heard the loud beeping noise from the microwave, which appeared to echo very loudly throughout the house. This startled me at first, and I was confused as to what had caused the noise, and then I remembered. Oh yeah, I made food. I grabbed the hot pocket from the microwave and retreated to my room to begin playing Minecraft with a friend of mine. As I played, I became more and more confused as to where I was in the game, and I kept forgetting the controls. While at the same time, I was excitedly telling my friend of the experience I was having. After trying to play the game for a while, I felt a very big wave of sedation come over my body, but I still felt very euphoric and energetic mentally. I decided to get off the game and went to lay down in my bed. Before I went to lay down, I remembered I had a wax cartridge that I had gotten from a dispensary about a week prior. I was very excited to see how this high potency distillate would potentiate the trip. Once I remembered this, I quickly got it out of its package and screwed it onto my battery and proceeded to take 4 to 5 big hits. After hitting the cartridge, I felt the sedation I was feeling increase by nearly 3 times. I put the battery and cartridge back in my drawer and flopped onto my bed. As soon as I lay down, I was caught off guard when I noticed my closet door frame, as well as the posters on my wall, which all appeared to be swaying back and forth, as well as the patterns on the ceiling coming back into my vision. I was happy to know that I was still experiencing visuals from this, and proceeded to put on some lo-fi hip-hop beats and close my eyes. Very shortly after closing my eyes, I entered what I can't explain in any other way other than a dream state. In this dream state, I suddenly was shot into a grassy field with a beautiful horizon, and one single weeping willow tree sitting at the top of a shallow hill. I went to walk towards the tree and noticed the bodiless feeling that I had experienced earlier in the trip. Once I got to the tree, I felt the grass below it and noticed how soft and comfortable it felt, so I decided to lay down underneath the tree and take a nap in the grass. Once I closed my eyes in this dream state, I began to experience extremely vivid memories from my childhood that I thought I had forgotten. I was watching these memories through a first-person view and remembered every detail with extreme vividness. The first memory I saw was in a small town in Maryland, where my cousins, who I haven't seen in over 10 years, lived. I was walking to a small convenience store with my cousin, who was the same age as me at the time. As we walked, I had the same exact conversation word for word with him that we had that time 10 years ago. The whole time during this memory, I knew that it wasn't really happening. Each time my cue came to talk in the conversation, I would tell him, "I'm dreaming. This isn't real." Each time I said this to him, he would ignore what I had said, and instead continue his side of the conversation as if I had responded normally. Once we reached the convenience store we were walking to, I opened the door and walked into a new memory. This memory being with the same cousin later that night in the theatre room of the family house. We were sitting on a large leather couch and playing Crash Bandicoot on our Game Boys. Again, I knew that I was dreaming, but continued on with our conversation as if it was happening in real time. After what felt like 30 minutes of playing my Game Boy, I died in the game, and as the end game screen came up, it filled up my entire vision, and it all went to black. I blinked a couple of times and entered a third memory that I had from 13 years ago with a different cousin. We were at my grandparents' home in a small Midwestern town, and we were riding our skateboards in the driveway. Again, like the past memories, we had a conversation that was word for word the same as we continued to ride our skateboards. After a short 5 or so minutes of this memory, I took a hard fall from hitting a small rock with my board. As soon as I hit the concrete, I left this dream state and shot up in my bed. After coming to, I heard my music that I had on and I was still experiencing the mild swaying of my posters and door. I was still somewhat confused as to what I had just experienced and checked the time on my phone, noticing that only 10 minutes had passed since I had closed my eyes. I was completely dumbfounded by this, since it had felt as if I had been gone for multiple hours. At this point, I still felt a heavy sedation and euphoria, but was very tired as well. I slowly got back up from my bed and decided to hit my wax cartridge another 5 or so times to help me get to sleep, since I was still somewhat mentally wired and knew it would be hard to sleep while still tripping. After hitting my cartridge, I lay back down and fall asleep very quickly to my surprise. I slept for almost 15 hours into the next day, and after waking up I felt very happy and energetic for the remainder of that day. I have come to love this chemical much more than LSD or magic mushrooms, since it seems to have a much more manageable mental state, whereas shrooms and LSD tend to confuse me and be far too intense. If you don't mind the nausea these seeds cause, I highly recommend them if you tend to get anxious easily, since the experience seems much more controllable and bad trips are easier to avoid. Spiritual Love is the Door to Meaning, a Morning Glory or LSA trip report by Lerner, uploaded to earwid.org May 19, 2008. I picked about 70 to 80 full-size but not fully matured pods from the heavenly blue Morning Glory plant growing on my yard. These were equivalent to about 280 to 320 seeds once matured. Removing the seed pod husk, I put the inner white and green pulp into a blender with about 80ml of Pinot Noir wine and 80ml of purified water and amala, a small, very sour fruit. I added this to make the potion more acidic. I blended it well and then let it sit for about 3 or 4 hours, shaking occasionally. At 11:15 am, I drank half of the brew. It actually tasted good. I drove my motorcycle to a wonderful area of wooded, hilly wilderness with great views. I ran to hike at around 11:45 and was feeling sort of spacey. I felt some pain in my legs and slight nausea. At 12:15, I drank the rest of the brew, which included all the solid matter at the bottom. The spacey feeling and nausea were increasing, but the nausea was not nearly as bad as it had been in other attempts with these seeds. The leg pain was also less as well. I remember early on, about 1 PM, establishing that the best relationship I can have with reality around me, and the Creator who provides it all, is one of acceptance and trust. That was valuable, but that is something I've thought about a lot, and already firmly believed in anyway. By 1:30, not much more was happening, and I was feeling a little frustrated. I felt confused and a general discomfort. It felt very similar to having a high fever, body discomfort and scattered thinking. Many years ago, I did LSD once, and it was one of the most beautiful and awesome, literally, experiences I've ever had. I was hoping for something like that with this, where everything danced with wonder and love, and I was one with everything. But this was different. In fact, I felt sort of detached from everything. Things seemed dead and meaningless. By 2 PM, I was ready to write the experience off as useless. There was a fork in the trail, and at first, I tried to take the harder, more dangerous route. Before long, I returned and took the easier, more trodden route. And here, the first great insight came. I don't need to save the world. I don't need to accomplish anything to be a valuable human being. None of us do. We are valuable regardless of what we do or don't do. We are loved and lovable no matter what path we take or don't take. A song on this subject began to flow in my heart, and I let myself sing out loud as nobody was around anyways. I continued on to the peak of the hill or mountain, and I then thought about my wife. I knelt down and prayed for her, though even the idea of God, which usually is very real to me, seemed sort of meaningless, as did physical reality around me. Then I just meditated on her. I suddenly began to weep, as I felt all of her bottled up fears and sorrows. I wept a long time, and I wept hard. I sobbed occasionally, but then would feel that there was more weeping to be done, and would begin to weep again. I let out vocally and moaned. I wasn't crying for myself, but for her. I felt her pain. It was real. It was powerful. From that point on, I stayed and steadied my mind on her, as everything else, physical reality and the idea of God, was fading into less and less meaning. Finally, I found the thing that was real, my love and devotion to my wife. I was tempted to follow all kinds of philosophical trains of thought, which I do a lot anyways, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to hold my wife in my mind. I just kept inviting her to experience reality with me as I touched a rock, sat on the grass, looked at the trees and the sky, etc. I felt her mind become as one with mine. We were one in spirit, though she was not near me bodily, nor did she take the seeds or know that I had taken them. Our love had become the window through which I could look at reality and understand its meaning and purpose. Our love made everything new and alive. Suddenly, I was in Eden with my Eve, though she wasn't with me physically. My ambitions had been keeping me emotionally distant from her, and my fear of her pain and her emotions, too, had been keeping me distant from her. First, the need to succeed was stripped from me, and I saw that success isn't where the value of human beings lie. Then, my fear of emotional intimacy with my wife was stripped away, and she became one with my consciousness. And then, in the context of our union, the world was suddenly alive and wonderful, and amazing beyond words. It was like all of creation was a playground, a representation of our spiritual union. I saw all kinds of vortexes and patterns in the sky, dancing like the portal to heaven. I saw the trees melt and breathe. The visuals were very beautiful and meaningful. But what was important was the inner connection with my wife. It was this that made the experience of everything else laden with meaning. And even more important was my renewed dedication and determination to love her and focus on her as she deserves, to not be afraid of her negative emotions, to not demand of myself grand successes, but to just love those around me, especially my wife. I knew that I would eventually return to a more mundane, less clear, more selfish way of thinking. I didn't look forward to it, but it's been almost 2 weeks now, and my life is still different. I used to struggle with lust in a major way, but now, when a temptation arises, I just recall the truth I learned while on Morning Glory Seeds, which is that my emotional and spiritual connection to my wife is the most important aspect of life, consciousness and reality. Only in context to my spiritual connection to her does anything else have any value or meaning. I invite her to be a part of my consciousness, and the temptation to just lust fades away and disappears. I had no idea that this is what the Creator had intended me to learn when I ingested the seeds, but I couldn't have asked for or even imagined anything nearly as valuable and good. It was one of the most beautiful, awesome, blessed and spiritual experiences I've ever known. The temptation is to think that the more drug experiences will bring even more good to my life, but the Morning Glory Seeds were just the teacher. I know I must learn to really believe and live out the lesson I learned before I'm ready for the next lesson. What good is learning a bunch if I can't make it real in my life? So I'm going to keep focusing on this lesson until I know it is truly a permanent part of me, before I delve into the magic world of Morning Glory or other drugs for the next lesson. I expect that this will take at least 6 months. The proof will be continuing peace and freedom from lust. It's now almost 4 weeks since I ate the Morning Glory Seeds. A week ago, I began to really long for the amazing experience again. I even brewed up some more, this time more potent. But during my morning meditation, I meditate every day, I realised that I've been obsessing about the beauty and wonder of the experience of the seeds more than I was focusing on what the experience had taught me. To focus on loving and devoting myself to my wife and other people's well-being. So it was a very hard decision, but I believe the right one. I poured the potion down the drain. If I had taken the seeds again, I'd have been lying to my wife by sneaking off to do drugs behind her back. I also would have betrayed the real lesson that had been communicated by the first experience of the seeds, thus nullifying any value in the first lesson or the one I might have had with the second brew. In summary, psychedelic drugs in my mind do have real value. They can teach us new ways of living, but the experience itself is often so wonderful and awesome beyond words that the danger is we end up seeking the pleasure of the experience over the value, the meaning and lesson of the experience. When I take these substances and have an experience, I can interpret it in one of 2 ways. A chemical made me feel, think and believe strange things for a while, or 2, a chemical changed my brain for a while in such a way that I was open to deep spiritual truths. If I keep using drugs in a careless or over-frequent way, then I am proving by my very actions that I don't believe the messages of the experience to be real. I am simply seeking the pleasure. But if I take the lesson of the experience and force myself to start practicing it in my more mundane, uninspired, unaltered state of mind, then I am proving by my very actions that I do value the lesson of the drugs, and so value the drugs as they deserve to be valued. Even now, I long for the wondrous experience of having my consciousness united to my wife's, and from this union, united to all of reality as well. It was exceedingly beautiful. But I know I need to practice making this kind of union real through my everyday living and thinking. I need to take actions that show her I love her. I need to think not on lust, but about her well-being. I need to obsess not about taking more psychedelic drugs so I can feel at one with her in reality, but start acting in a way that proves I believe this inner union is ultimately real, and that I can awaken, gradually, to its reality without the aid of a chemical. The seeds did cause a lot of body discomfort, including nausea and 12 hours of muscle pain in my case. LSD was so free, no physical discomfort at all in my case. So while I don't enjoy pain or nausea at all, I think it is the Creator's way of reminding us to use these teachers with care and respect. LSD, a synthetic drug, was like turning on a switch to spiritual reality, and it didn't have the same security guard as Morning Glory. Morning Glory seeds were like having to climb up through physical pain, psychological issues and spiritual problems, before entering into the realm where true spiritual reality is witnessed. the unity of all things by means of love. The Forest Dragon. First experience with LSA. I awoke around 5 PM and headed over to a friend's house. I was at the onset of a 4-day weekend and decided it would be a great time to trip. Having neither LSD nor mushrooms on hand, my friend suggested that I try LSA. He had acquired a large collection of organic morning glory seeds. He warned me that I would experience pretty severe stomach pains without doing a cold water extraction, but being somehow unafraid of the prospect of stomach pain or just too lazy, I decided to ingest approximately 500 seeds the old-fashioned way. I had taken wild lettuce extract just before heading over and was feeling slightly relaxed, but not necessarily sleepy. I suspect that the wild lettuce added to the negative experience I had at the onset of dosing, but I cannot say with any certainty. I dosed the seeds around 9:30 PM. Within half an hour I realised I had not eaten anything else that day, and decided to make myself something to eat. I felt myself becoming physically drained exponentially, and by the time I had begun to cook my soup, I began experiencing the stomach pains. I decided to leave the soup for later, as suddenly I was too tired and pained to eat. I went into the living room and sat on a beanbag chair, staring blankly at the empty TV screen. I could only think about my discomfort and tiredness. I put a blanket over myself and curled up in an attempt to sleep. I felt myself drifting off further and further mentally, but somehow I knew my body was not in a physical sleep state. I took the blanket off and decided to put something on the TV to distract myself. There was a show on the National Geographic channel about survival. I couldn't really pay attention, I was too taken with the sensations in my body. I felt as if my bones had gained extra weight, like my flesh was too soft to contain my body frame, but the discomfort was beginning to fade thankfully. Frankly, I had been doubtful of the effectiveness of eating morning glory seeds for LSA, but that was about to change. Around 11 o'clock, I told my friend that I was tired, something I considered to be a consequence of the wild lettuce, and that was not wanting to trip. He very wisely turned my psychology around. He got some music and video games playing in an attempt to energise me, and suggested that I walk around for a bit. I didn't feel like leaving the apartment, so I just paced uncomfortably. I felt a pain in my calves, but nothing in my thighs, though I had been warned that either might happen. Once energised and pumped for the trip to come, I sat down on the couch and began to stare at the floorboards. I recall being shocked and thinking, visuals? What? I had no idea what was to come. The floorboards began sliding into each other like tectonic plates, sliding under one another. Next, I began to see what I can only describe as an oscillating representation of the 58 wrathful deities of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. The bright, luminescent and translucent, ever rotating. I'm not sure at what point this began to happen, but I noticed it when in the restroom of the apartment, which has a much lighter colour scheme than the rest of the place. This visual effect carried with me for the entirety of the trip, though the images and textures changed as to their pattern and personal significance. Recognisable images of skulls, screaming faces, serpents' eyes, and unintelligible text all faded in and out of my constant visual perspective. Around 11:30, I began to experience enhanced visual melting. Objects upon which I focused loosely, i.e. looked at but did not consider, often glowed with a colourful aura, and then moved slightly in one direction. It was around 2:30, while the effects were still going strong and my nausea had worn off completely, that my friend, who was also tripping on a dose of 500 seeds, suggested we take a walk outside and see where the night might lead us. I thought we would walk a few blocks, come back and fall asleep uneventfully. Outside, The world was breathing in a way. I looked at the street sign on the corner, and the numbers upon it were rocking, surrounded by bright purple, but were still totally legible. I found this amazing, because I've been typically unable to read much of anything while tripping any time before. I could see an accurate image of my surroundings for a 1 or 2 block radius, and I retained my navigational skills with no noticeable difficulty. But anything I saw further away than perhaps 100 feet was subject to my interpretation, unstable, melting and shifting in colour, distance and consistency. After walking 10 blocks or so, we encountered a fellow wearing a curious outfit. He was drunk and was curious as to what we were doing out and about. I was extraordinarily nervous around this person, and my tripmate could tell. They conversed for a bit, until the fellow admitted he had done quite a bit of cocaine and somehow ended up with a purse which was not his own. At that point, we wisely decided to move on. We'd been discussing ideas of dialogue and apology earlier. I'm a sociologist and my friend a mathematician, and I cannot explain how insightful and enlightening it was, and is, to gain commentary from a new perspective about the existential and social issues which occupy the greater part of my contemplative life. We wandered several more blocks and for several hours. I'm not sure of the time frame in which we travelled, but we ended up at the riverfront maybe an hour before sunrise. We walked to the river's edge for a rest. As I looked over the river, I was amazed. I have always been fascinated by the mystery of what is hidden beneath the water, and in this state I could see an endless biosystem of mystic tentacled creatures and leviathan-sized fish. After staring into the water for a long while, the sky began to pick up a glow. I saw the outline of the forest ridges across the river. They were distant, but I felt as if there was no distance. All things were close, even inside me. The forest began to glow with an intense purple colour, then the various ridges of trees moved separately from one another as if an animated monster from a 1950s era film. I imagined the ridge to be the back of an enormous green dragon. My friend brought my attention to the water again. Staring at its surface, I saw various lines forming again into serpents and tentacles. I was drawn into this world of beauty when I was suddenly distracted by what I assumed was a piece of driftwood. As it moved along, I was unable to tell if it was alive or not. I saw an extensive body and several flailing tentacles below the surface of the water, and was frightened that what I was seeing might actually be real. My friend reassured me it was not living, and when he did so, the object seemed to speed toward him, which caused both of us to back away from the river in fear. We laughed at our mutual fright and decided that what we had seen was just a piece of wood. I looked up to the now blue sky. Bright traces flew upward from the forest ridges, forming a triangle in the sky. Rotating around the triangle was the outline of the 42 peaceful deities of Tibetan Buddhism. I felt a rush of energy, as if a vast repository of experiences, sights and thoughts were being uploaded to me. I wondered about the significance of watching the sunrise. I wondered if the sun were capable of transferring information to me. We left, stopping once more to view the sunrise for a while. We both reported that we were hungry and tired, but as we continued walking, our needs were suppressed. We needed nothing. We were nothing in a world to be endlessly appreciated and known. If you are considering taking LSA, I suggest doing so with lots of energy, and taking things very slowly at first. Ignore any feelings of regret you may experience while enduring physical pain, and be reassured that given a sufficient dose, you will be able to suppress the stomachache or any leg pain. I definitely think this drug is most effective when used for spiritual or therapeutic reasons, but I tend to carry this opinion about any psychedelic, and can imagine a potentially fun recreational experience on LSA as well.
a Hawaiian Baby Woodrose trip report, sent in by a subscriber. Greetings, dear reader. Here I present to you an experience of mine that occurred in 2010, which is still as clear as day in my mind even today. I would like to share it for educational and safety purposes, but also just for your introspection. I hope it will also be a good read. I should quickly mention that I have also tripped on psilocybe cubensis upwards of 10 times. I like to reserve my trips for when I am absolutely ready and in a relatively healthy state of mind, to fully absorb whatever beautiful truths and realizations materialize, as profoundly as possible. I usually brewed psilocybe as hot water extracts, teas, but have also partaken of a psilocybin-infused chocolate bar and ingested the mushroom itself once or twice. I never felt nauseous at all from them, and I quite enjoyed and appreciated the earthy flavour. I have also smoked Salvia divinorum from 2010 to perhaps 2014, only about 5 to 10 times, but always with less of an effect than what is usually reported. I must have not been able to hold the smoking long enough, or something to that effect, as I never had a very intense experience with it. Well, anyway, here goes nothing. It was early autumn where I was living, and that crisp, refreshing atmosphere, alight with its colourful leaves falling from the trees, was absolutely intoxicating. I was attending university in this city, and was really enjoying the excitement of being there. I was working on my second year at university, doing very well in all of my classes up to this point. The character and energy of this city had proven to really bring out my extroverted and energetic side more than ever, which I can still remember and physically feel even to this day. I was constantly out walking the streets and enjoying the scenery, practically every moment that wasn't hitting the books. There was oftentimes bustling pedestrian traffic on the streets in the areas that I frequented. These streets were largely lined with cafes, restaurants, shops and parks, where many people would sit and contemplate this or that. Some would be having very animated conversations with each other, while others were studiously squinting at laptop screens. I just remember each day feeling more and more like I was tapping into the most enjoyable part of my life, and I wanted to explore who I was and what it all means. I was always an engaged and curious person, enthralled by the mysteries of the universe and life. Even my fashion changed after moving here, to reflect how I felt. I really did feel that I could be my authentic self there, and being gay, this was something that for me was very liberating and exciting. The lack of oppression, and like a type of rebirth, I would say. Previously, I had always been very timid and studious, trying to be what my family wanted me to be. I'd been exposed to cannabis the previous year, 2009, by a fellow resident at university, but only truly began using it daily about a year after that first exposure. During the time in which the events described below occurred, it had become a near daily habit for me already. I loved, and still do love cannabis, though I've struggled with overuse and abuse for now over a decade. There used to be a store in the southern extremity of the hipster borough in the city, called Psychonaut. The owner was well versed in the provision of entheogenic substances. However, frustratingly, he would only provide what he thought the person was ready for, or so he claimed. I was in fact searching for San Pedro cactus, as I felt a calling to this plant and its medicine at the time. He immediately told me that he did not have any, but I did see a cactus in the corner of his shop. What I was suggested to try instead will forever leave untold scars on my life. He suggested that I try Hawaiian Baby Woodrose seeds. I did not purchase these seeds right away that same day. Instead, I did some reading online and saw that they contain lysergic acid amide, or LSA. I messaged a friend I had made the previous year while living in Res. He agreed that it should be an interesting experience, so I returned and picked up 8 of the seeds for about $10 Canadian. A few days later, during the late afternoon, around 4 PM, I had just let my friend R into my apartment. It was just the two of us, and I was sitting with him at my dining table, Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds out and ready to go. I was making sure to carefully and meticulously peel all of the dark outer coating off of each of the seeds. I remember feeling an intense wave of anticipation, but not in a bad way. I then put the chunky brown seeds, that looked rather interesting and seemed to have an intimidating aura about them, into my small marble mortar and pestle. I pounded and ground them carefully until they were reduced to a fine powder. I did this with 4 seeds at a time, so that my friend and I each had an equal dose, at least of seed powder. Concentrations of active ingredients may vary from one seed to the next, of course. Thinking back on this moment, I was foolish to take all 4 seeds as a first dose. A rookie mistake indeed. We then began to eat the seed powder, tentatively at first. It was very bitter, in an earthy sort of way. I'm not at all turned off by strange tasting things though. I even enjoy eating bitter melon. After about what seemed like 20 minutes, I began to feel a very heavy, droopy feeling in my body, and the lights in my apartment were suddenly noticeable and more intense seeming. When I glanced at the mirror, I saw that my face looked quite pale and sallow. I distinctly noticed and was intensely disturbed by the realization that my right pupil was noticeably larger than my left pupil. This is in fact always the case with my eyes. It just seemed absolutely wrong and horrifying at that moment for some reason, as if it were grossly amplified. My pupils were also both very dilated, more than I had ever seen them before. I quickly left the bathroom and asked my friend, "Look, do you see this pupil? It's larger." At that moment he was sitting on my sofa, looking off ahead into space in a daze. But he then abruptly said he had to leave to get home and be alone, and I reluctantly said goodbye. I began to have the sense that the idea of clothing itself was an absolute abomination, and I was starting to feel like it was nothing more than a hindrance to my body. All of a sudden, it simply just felt wrong to have clothing hanging off of my body. I started to feel that my mind was becoming extremely powerful and clear, more sharp and quick than it had ever been before in my life. I promptly removed all of my clothing, save for my underwear. I began to engage in some sort of slow, deliberate, ecstatic dance in the middle of my living room, to no music at all. But then it suddenly became stupidly clear that all light was an assault on my senses. I turned off every single light in my apartment and closed the blinds completely. I felt as if I was able to move and think much more quickly and intelligently than usual. In spite of this, I got the urge to lay down on the couch, and I opened up my laptop and booted up MSN Messenger. Yes, this was 2010 after all. I just felt the need to connect with others in that moment, as I did not want in any way to be alone at all. I began to converse with as many friends online as I could at one moment, and I began to see that my hands were in fact very, very much like spiders. Rather than hands typing, my fingers were the legs of spiders, and were capable of moving with such unimaginable speed and accuracy. The legs of the spiders' bodies were able to move at a lightning speed compared to my usual fingers, and my thoughts were forming at breakneck velocity and accelerating. Yet I could type and converse at what seemed to be a godly rate to me at that moment. I got the sense that I had become extremely powerful, intelligent, quick, and just much more intense than a human could possibly be. I felt that I was gaining a sort of godlike persona. By now, the light from my laptop was like a lighthouse in an ocean of darkness, and my hands were spiders flailing in front of the light, conveying messages to those on the other side. I was explaining to my closest friends that I was tripping on LSA, from Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds, and how it felt while on LSA. I explained how lysergic acid amide, LSA, is molecularly similar to lysergic acid ethylamide, LSD, but that it occurs naturally in some plant species. The glowing of my laptop and the oddly rigid dashing movements of my spider leg fingers as I typed in the dark room was just an extension of my consciousness. Over time, everyone began signing off on MSN Messenger to go to bed, as it was now approaching midnight. All of a sudden, when my last friend signed off, however, I began to have an utterly terrific sense of profound dread. The darkness of my bedroom, where I had moved to at some point, was evil. The silence was heartless. I began to feel very thirsty and nauseous at the same time. The dread began to swallow me up. This is where things took a tragic and bizarre nosedive into hell. The crushing sense of loneliness began to take over, and I could start to feel my heart beating uncomfortably fast. I got up with no lights on, yet I could see everything clearly. What little light that was coming through cracks and crevices was intense enough in this state for me to see clearly. Now the nausea and waves of weakness passing through me and the sense of dread were overcoming me. I went to the bathroom and got so viciously sick to my stomach that I was curling up as I retched. There, on the floor of the bathroom, I must have stayed for at least an hour in utter writhing agony. I thought to myself, please don't let me die in the bathroom, throwing up into the toilet. Please. Not like this. So I found my way to my feet, put on some pyjamas, and tried to have some fruit juice, a tropical blend from a certain brand. At first it tasted as wonderful as always, but to my surprise the sugar must have triggered some sort of rejection in my body, perhaps caused by the Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. I felt a new, even worse wave of nausea expand through me, and I ran back to the washroom where more misery ensued. This was a very persistent, unending nausea with no end in sight. My heart began racing again, and I looked in the mirror using a very dim orange nightlight. What I saw was most terrifying and ghastly to me. I perceived in the mirror that my skin looked at least 20 years aged. I was 20 at the time. And each scar or bump on it looked so much more ridiculously pronounced. My pupils were extremely dilated, and I had the appearance of a morbid individual. This sent me even more quickly down the mental spiral of doom. I quickly called one of my good friends, S, who was from the same town as me. We didn't know each other before meeting in the city for university though. I told her what I had taken and that something wasn't right, and I needed her to come and check on me to see what she thought. She was extremely kind, and said she would be there as fast as she could. I feel that this next piece was an actual precipitation of the anxiety disorder that is still with me to this day, that destroyed my long-term relationship with the love of my life, and that has eaten away at me ceaselessly ever since. Only now, I am finding ways to let it go more than before, and to be able to enjoy larger parts of my life. Sudden panics can resurface at any time though. They usually revolve around health-related catastrophizing. Anyway, I was waiting for my friend, wondering what would happen to me ultimately, with my heart absolutely in tachycardia, when I heard an ambulance or something outside. This city is kind of crazy of how often you hear sirens, whether they are fire trucks, police cars, or ambulances, especially downtown where I was living. I suddenly became even more terrified that my friend might have called an ambulance for me, and that the paramedics would whisk me to the hospital. They would surely call my parents and my university and the police and it was suddenly as if something inside my mind shattered. My heart was simply going to explode. The ambulance was coming, I thought. It was almost here. It had to be. It's all over now. What will I do? Slowly, the ambulance siren faded away as I sat on a chair in the kitchen, trying to calm my heart down in utter terror. My heart just kept on pounding at an ungodly speeds. Sometime after this, my friend found her way into my rather sketchy building and knocked on my apartment door. Knowing how horrific I looked, wrapped in a blanket, hunched over in nausea and all sallow and whatnot, I slowly opened the door. She did indeed seem shocked to see how dark my apartment was, and how out of sorts and terrified I was. She intelligently opted to calm me down and sit with me in my living room as I threw up projectile style into a bucket and waited until things slowly abated. She truly is a sweet person, with a kind soul. I felt like I could really count on her. Without her, I'm not sure how much worse this could have been. Things eventually calmed down and I eventually stopped retching. She headed out, and I went straight to bed and slept for about 7 or 8 hours. I was still somewhat nauseous and weak when I woke up the next day, and was certainly out of commission for the whole day. I felt the lingering sense of anxiety, but much less, and I was happy that the LSA seemed to be wearing off. While my body recovered just fine over the days, my mind is left with the remaining effect of this anxiety. Other terrible things then also happened over the next few months, which surely solidified this anxiety into my psyche. But I am certain that these seeds were the precipitant for what I believe to be a type of psychosis around body anxiety, where I become unable to tell what is really a dangerous ailment and what is not, and what is potentially threatening versus what isn't. If you have a family history of anxiety, I would stay away from these seeds. Pay close attention to your family and learn your origins and tolerances. I can still persist in life. I keep a full-time job, I have my own car and apartment, and I have hobbies I love and enjoy. But I wondered what I could have become without precipitating this anxiety. Will I ever be able to really get past it? It's been 14.5 years. Would it have happened at a later time in my life otherwise? I realised I was perhaps just unlucky, as everyone else around me who tried these seeds was just fine. I wanted to become learned in the ways of shamanistic practices surrounding plants and fungi, but this unfortunately was a damaging trip for me. I do hope that after reading this you might take more caution in your choices. Learn as much about yourself as you can, and ensure that you will not be alone or in any compromising situation before tripping. You really must ensure a comforting, safe, happy environment before engaging with potent mind-altering substances. To what extent did my cannabis habit affect the progression of this anxiety? I do not know. But I did use high THC illegal cannabis for many years. It became legalized and regulated here around 7 years ago now. I indulged in the volcano vaporizer, and would get simply blasted out of my skull with weed, greening out from time to time, from 2013 until 2023, when I began truly reducing my use and finding wonderful things about stopping, such as the return of meaningful, vivid dreams. Dreams have always been a spiritual gateway for me. My goal is to gain full dream lucidity. Thankfully, I had discovered psilocybin in 2012, 2 years later, and had my first truly wonderful psychedelic experience, the first of several, always wonderful psilocybin trips. So, all in all, I'm glad to say that my relationship to psychedelics, in the form of psilocybe, was restored to a glorious state.
A Sublime Journey, an Amanita muscaria and Hawaiian baby woodrose trip report, posted by Earth Traveller to irwid.org January 4th, 2019. Amanita muscaria mushrooms have been used for centuries to alter consciousness by shamans in Siberia and other cultures. Occasionally, I found beautiful specimens among the pines in the backyard of my Wyoming mountain home, before they're harvested by squirrels. This spring's weather conditions produced an unprecedented huge crop of large ones, some the size of tea saucers. They appeared just as I had begun reading Michael Pollan's fascinating study of psychedelics history and ongoing research, How to Change Your Mind. The synchronicity was my green light suggesting it was finally time to experiment again, so I gathered and dried a batch of amanitas. In the early 60s I took a couple of trips with morning glory seeds. The first time I prepared well, had a good guide and had a transcendent experience. My second trip though was awful, because I wasn't careful enough about set and setting, and took the drug out of curiosity rather than as a sacrament. The last of my 6 LSD trips was in the early 70s. Aside from cannabis, that was the extent of my drug experimentation. For the last several years, I'd been feeling a growing urge to once again try an entheogen, a drug that causes one to become inspired or to experience feelings of inspiration, often in a religious or spiritual manner. I've studied Tai Chi for over 45 years, and have faithfully practiced meditation, mostly Buddhist insight meditation, for over 40 years. I'd been feeling stuck in my meditation practice for a while, and hoped a mushroom journey would help me find a way through that. Although the fluidity of the sense of self is familiar territory to me by now, I believed the mushroom would also make that more clear, and it did. In order to be a better guide for me, the trusted friend who agreed to be my anchor read Pollan's book, and took a mushroom journey by himself a couple weeks before mine. He lives in a gorgeous rural setting, far from neighbours, with a river running through the backyard, a perfect retreat space. Around 9:30 am on September 12, 2018, I carefully chewed up a medium-sized mushroom, 1 medium cap of amanita, and 4 Hawaiian baby wild rose seeds, chemically similar to morning glory seeds. I included the seeds because my friend had taken them on his mushroom trip and had a powerful positive experience. The mushroom tasted earthy and unique, and the seeds had little taste, and I started experiencing a perceptual shift within minutes. So much happened during my mushroom journey that the following day I thought I could write an extremely long story or a short novel about it. Instead, I've had difficulty writing anything at all. The experience was so profound that words can barely hint at the reality. The day was sublime and magnificent, and I spent much of it in awe. Recalling it continues to inspire awe as well. Because of my meditation practice, I encountered nothing unfamiliar. Yet like looking at things through a microscope or a telescope, the ordinary was transformed into the extraordinary. My primary goal was to ask the mushroom's help in exploring some habitual physical knots. In particular, one calf muscle I've been trying to loosen for years with little success. When my friend massaged it, his touch released a stream of childhood memories involving my large, close, extended family. I was transported to a family farm and searched through memories and feelings until settling on a painful incident involving a cousin's betrayal. The accompanying humiliation was apparently the source of my leg discomfort. I have yet to understand the connection fully, and there's been no noticeable change in the muscle. Touch on the other knee brought up memories of its own physical injury, which also happened around that time, involving another cousin. I was surprised to discover many tight muscles in that calf as well. I've been exploring that injury's physical consequences since the memory came up in Tai Chi years ago, but I paid little attention before to the emotional aspects of the memory. I now recalled humiliation. Growing up in Wyoming with great pressure to cowboy up, tough it out, be a man, and above all, don't be a sissy and cry. While exploring my calf muscles a few days later, I remembered the phrase, to cut someone off at the knees, defined as, to squelch or humiliate suddenly and thoroughly. And this made perfect sense. I spent much of the day thinking about my many cousins and countless other people I love. Each person I thought of seemed quite present, in a state where time and space were far more elastic. As I lay on my back on the grass under a favourite tree, listening to the river, watching the blue sky and clouds through shimmering leaves, each falling leaf seemed like a jolly little reminder to wake up. I felt profound love for the tree, which had provided me welcome shade on many summer days and opportunities to watch nesting birds. I realised that everything in nature can be a teacher if we just slow down enough to truly pay attention to the natural world, including the body itself. Many insights came while thinking about my Tai Chi students and how I might teach them more effectively. I realised that we contract our neck muscles in reaction to thoughts of both superiority and inferiority. When we feel inferior or unworthy, the mid-back bends forward, the shoulders round in submission and defensiveness, and the neck pinches. When we feel superior, we tighten the mid-back, pull the shoulders back, and tilt the head back in conceit, pinching the neck. In addition to moulding customary posture, this dynamic also happens at subtle levels from moment to moment, as our thoughts constantly swing from one pole to the other, finally coming to rest only when the ego is silent. I came to regard the mushroom as a wise, benevolent guide and helper. It reminded me frequently to notice the tensions in my belly as well. Although I never actually felt nauseated, throughout the day I felt countless gentle upchuck impulse signals to slow down, pay attention, and relax the abdominal muscles. The closest I came to nausea was in response to my friend's suggestion that I take a later booster dose of mushrooms, which I declined. The subtle nausea signals continued to a lesser degree 3 weeks later, repeatedly showing me how habitually I hold unnecessary belly tensions. Over and over I was reminded to let go of any resistance as soon as I noticed it. I was pleasantly surprised by how functional I was throughout the day, and the experience bolstered my confidence in my ability to deal with whatever may come my way. My friend said later that I was unusually gregarious and extroverted. I became very talkative, and was aware that my unusual behaviour was sometimes unsettling to him. I got plenty of practice watching my impulse to apologise. Years ago at a 3-week meditation retreat, a new group of people joined us halfway through. Their much faster energy felt like being in a swarm of bees or a herd of buffalo. Similarly, during my mushroom journey, my friend's pace seemed like sitting next to a busy freeway. When I went to bed at 11 that night, my mind was still so active that I didn't fall asleep for a couple more hours, well past my usual bedtime. In the course of my mushroom journey, I offered up 2 prayers. May I be a clear channel for this love, and may this understanding continue. The increased level of sensitivity and body awareness does continue. Whenever I slow down enough, I can easily find my way back to that awareness. When I step outdoors, nature clears my mind more easily than before. After a lifetime of soap opera drama and angst, much of my time in recent years is spent in peaceful bliss. My mushroom experience taught me a different way of seeing, making that state easier to access. I'd like to take another journey in solitude, perhaps next spring, to see how that changes the experience. Next time I'll skip the Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds, wondering whether a dried mushroom qualifies as a living being right now. I recall the Buddha's encouragement to avoid holding on to the idea that a self, a person, a living being or a lifespan exists. But nonetheless, I imagine the mushroom as a friend, living under the soil in the backyard, now asleep for the winter. An Entity of Love and Kindness. A Morning Glory and 2CI Trip Report by Hanny. Uploaded to erowid.org December 25th, 2013. I'd been experimenting with psychedelics for about a year when I made the decision to ingest Ipomoea tricolor seeds. Previous to my trip, I'd had a moderate level of experience with these type of drugs, and I had, after a period of research, developed an interest in trying morning glories. I collected up a large handful of pods off of a large heavenly blue vine I found growing on a fence in my neighbourhood. I discovered, after separating the seeds from the plant material, that I had collected a total of 160 seeds. I resolved to eat 100 of them the following weekend on a day I had the house to myself. It was an unusually warm autumn Friday, upon which I awakened early to prepare for my trip. I cleaned my house, ate a small breakfast, and packed a meal in a backpack, for I decided that, if I felt well, I would go on a bike ride for the first part of my voyage. It was at 10 AM that I put 100 seeds in my mouth and chewed them thoroughly. Now, I had considered that the absorption of the LSA would probably be more rapid if I had held the seed paste in my mouth for as long as possible. It was difficult, however, to force myself to keep the goo in my mouth. The paste had a decidedly unpleasant flavour that for the first few minutes had a vague tingly sensation to it. I've read others describe the taste as a combination of spinach and perfume. This is as accurately as I could describe it. I managed to keep it in my mouth for about 10 minutes before I swallowed it with sips of water. Waited a while before embarking on my bike ride. I'd read before that nausea was a common side effect of morning glories, so I decided it would be best if I stayed within the safety of my home to ensure I felt well before leaving. My stomach felt mildly unsettled for the first 45 minutes, but after that point, I could notice no unpleasant body load. It was approaching 11 AM as I began to realise the effects would not be as strong as I might have hoped. I chewed another 50 seeds and waited a further hour to be sure before leaving on my bike ride. Before departing, I noted some mild visual changes. For a moment, a very slight pattern assembled itself upon my ceiling, but still no remarkable effects yet. At 12:10 PM, I stopped for a moment at a park along the bike path. At this point, I noticed that my capacity for introspection and critical thought had increased, as I casually turned over in my head a conflict I had with a friend recently. While sitting upon a swing, I opened my wallet to check for money, and I found a 10mg dose of 2CI, left over from a period when I sold it. It was nestled in one of its pockets that I'd forgotten about. After some careful consideration, I would be alone this day, and I was certain I would be able to handle eating this dose. I took the 2CI. This was at about 12:15 PM now. For the majority of my 2-hour bike ride, the effects of the drugs remained subtle. I felt a mental clarity and noted a very slight intensification of colours. It was on my way home, the time approaching about 1:30 PM at this point, that I felt the first rise in my trip. While I've been riding my bike at a relatively lazy pace along the path, my speed now decreased further. Although I could see no visuals, I knew my trip had begun, because in addition to the previous sensation I described, I now felt a certain heaviness in my limbs. As I arrived home at around 1:45 PM, I paused upon entering my doorway. I immediately noticed that some patterns were beginning to manifest themselves upon different surfaces within my home. I drank a glass of water and went upstairs to take a shower, as I was quite sweaty after my jaunt. The patterns I was seeing, I thought, I could attribute to the 2CI. I had a fair amount of experience with that chemical, and I had learnt to recognise the distinct visuals it produced. However, I noticed in the shower some interesting hue shifts. The light filtering through the shower curtain would suddenly look redder than it had before, then greener, and so on. Within 15 minutes, I was out of the shower, dried off, and reclined on my bed. Over the course of several years, I've decorated my room with various paintings and drawings I've created. Now, I enjoyed looking at them as my visuals became further pronounced. Colours looked like light was glinting off of them. I could determine several different hues when ordinarily there would be one. Different shades of white on a wall, for example. Parts of some pictures seemed to grow larger and phase into others, an effect that, again, seemed like the 2CI. Patterns shifted and spread across my walls and ceiling. One thing I did notice at this phase was the prominence of colour stains. Anyone who has looked at the sun can attest that a spot will stay in their vision. Similarly, looking at an intense hue would stain my field of view. However, I found it somewhat cumbersome that any particularly rich colour would affect my sight for several seconds. It was now about 2:15 PM. I noticed that I felt quite weak. I'm hypoglycemic, so staying fed regularly is important, especially during a trip. It took a fair bit of self-control to stay on the task of making myself food, in spite of my hunger. I was excited to partake in the activities I'd set up for myself. I realised, while waiting for my food to microwave, that I was experiencing extreme time dilation. After eating my lunch, my appetite was slightly decreased, I noted. I went to sit in my backyard. It was around now that I believed I had entered my peak. Up until now, I'd been thinking as I carried on my activities. However, thinking now became an activity in itself. My visuals had now become more intense and pleasant, so I sat in a lawn chair, considering very intently some personal problems I had been having with friends. I was amazed at the insight I was able to have on an issue I felt stuck on. After a few minutes of this, I decided to go indoors to do some meditation. It's after this point that my concept of time becomes muddy. I know there were several activities I partook in, but it's difficult for me to distinguish in retrospect for how long and in what order they occurred. This can greatly be attributed to the time dilation I mentioned earlier. I'd repeatedly feel shocked upon looking at the clock and discovering how little time had elapsed. That being said, I will try my best to describe the events following this. I'd practiced meditation for a while before my trip. When I do so, I typically focus my attention upon the sensation of my breathing, and from there, try to empty my mind entirely of thoughts. I used this technique for the 2 instances I attempted meditation during my trip. Each attempt lasted around 5 minutes or less, a retrospective estimate with my warped time perception taken into consideration. But in spite of the short duration, the results were fantastic. I was sitting in a comfortable chair and doing my best to ignore my vivid closed-eye visuals. I saw the intricate petals of a flower opening and swaying, and each time I came to new understandings about the nature of my being. The first incident, I experienced for the first time what I will consider a touch hallucination. The best way I can describe this is by likening it to the shifting movement of OEVs that are common with many psychedelics, or open-eye visuals. The viewer knows that it is not real, but their brain tells them that something static is slowly shifting and pulsing. Now, I will ask you to try to imagine the same concept, but for touch. My hands were resting gently on my thighs, and after a few moments, I felt my flesh undulating beneath my palms. I knew my body to be completely still, but it felt as if my skin was moving in slow, thick waves beneath my hands. This strange sensation triggered the revelation that my body wasn't mine. My entire being was an intangible consciousness that resided in my head, and it was merely the puppet master of this form that had been lent to me by some cosmic chance. I opened my eyes, and the room bloomed out before me. Objects had now gained a rainbow-like aura around themselves. I took a few moments to consider what I had learnt. Throughout the whole trip, I'd felt very content and whole. The euphoria I felt was deep and emanated from something greater than just immediate pleasure. I felt the love of the universe. The love I felt was so strong that I even experienced legitimate companionship in my various houseplants. But now, I realised that I was an entity made of love and kindness. My mother had borne me in spite of the pain of childbirth. I was clothed and nurtured as a helpless infant, and countless plants and animals died so my body could develop. Furthermore, even the basic atoms of my body were assembled from cosmic stardust that had mystically come together through fantastic chance. Upon this realization, I attempted meditation for a second time. The distinction between my body and my consciousness intensified through this experience. I saw my little being as an object afloat in a sea of matter, each atom indistinguishable from those next to it. There were no true borders between my body and its neighbouring molecules. The only thing that kept me anchored to existence was the amalgamation of white noise I heard, which visually represented itself to my closed eyes as a small beacon. After this phase, my trip took on a new theme: love and kindness. It was this that hued my periods of thinking that occurred every 10 minutes or so, and helped me come to a conclusion for my various problems with friends. I realised that relationships should not be viewed through the lens of self-gratification, but rather, this should be seen as a means of making another person happy. We befriend a person, and we place upon them our expectations of them, and if they're not achieved, we become angry and ask them to change. I now newly saw my problems unified into one. I couldn't change the people, but I could change the way I controlled myself. I could accept that my unfulfilled expectations made me angry, and learn to let go of those expectations. For the rest of the peak, about 2 hours, I felt perfect and whole. My cheeks were pink with heat, my eyes frequently welled with tears of happiness and gratefulness, especially when listening to emotional music, which I did while I tried writing some poetry. I also noticed that I was sweating quite profusely out of excitement. I reread James Joyce's Araby, after I'd finished doing some writing of my own. It was very enjoyable. I particularly enjoyed the figurative language he used, and had an intense period of reflection on the theme of the story after reading, more fruitful than I would have normally had. Unfortunately, reading could be somewhat difficult, as the letters in my peripherals would seem to move or shift into a pattern on the page, which was quite distracting. As my peak began to wind down, I went for a short walk around my neighbourhood. Throughout the whole trip, I had a very interesting body high, and walking now felt very unusual and pleasurable. After I arrived home at probably around 4 PM, I simply listened to music and enjoyed some of my visuals. While the effects of the morning glories ended within a couple hours of that time, I felt the 2CI continue until about 7 or 8 in the evening, mostly manifesting itself in pronounced patterns. This proved slightly irritating, as I was attempting to do some reading. Overall, I cannot express how positively my life and relationships have been affected by this experience. Here are some notes I would like to conclude with. This is my first experience spending an entire trip alone. I'm inclined to favour morning glories as a psychedelic, as they are not very visually intense, and thereby I could concentrate more on my thoughts. But this is just my opinion, and is not based upon scientifically compared experiences. To those who wish to chew their seeds, I might suggest chewing 50 or so at a time. My mouth was completely filled with the paste of those 100 seeds, and in retrospect, I might have considered taking my dose in 2 mouthfuls to reduce its unpleasantness. Thank you so much for reading, and may you too feel the love.
A marvellous, joyful, encouraging journey. An Amanita muscaria and Hawaiian baby woodrose trip report. Posted by Lucky57 to earwid.org September 1st, 2018. If it matters, I'm 6'6", height weight proportionate. I took these substances at home by myself at 4:20 PM Mountain Daylight Savings Time on August 11th, 2018. This instance was the first time I'd ever taken any sort of mushroom. I'd read that keeping the dosage low is a good idea on the first try. I'd taken Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds before in combination with morning glory seeds, with somewhat unsatisfactory results: nausea, lack of intensity, etc. My mindset was extremely relaxed in the matter. I felt quite confident about what I was doing and that nothing would happen that I couldn't handle psychologically. I'd read that having a sitter, at least on the first try, was a good idea. But I consider myself a very stable person, one who's endured a couple of so-called bad trips along with some very traumatic experiences in life. But having survived them all and being in my 60s, I didn't feel prone to any sort of psychological breakdown. I didn't wish to take on an empty stomach. I felt that might lead to nausea. I tried various preparation methods with morning glory seeds, all of which were taken on an empty stomach with the experience of nearly intolerable nausea. About 90 minutes prior to ingestion of the caps and seeds, I ate a turkey and cheese sandwich with a little mustard and a little caffeine-free Diet Coca-Cola. I tore off small pieces of the mushroom and chewed them all carefully. It didn't really taste that bad either, sort of earthy, musky. I took all 4 seeds at once and chewed them, leaving them under my tongue for a minute, then swallowing them. Then, I took 2 dimenhydrinate, not diphenhydramine I must say, or Benadryl. They're these anti-nausea tablets, and alongside that I ate a clementine orange since I'd heard that acidic fluids help to potentiate the alkaloids in the mushrooms and seeds. After about an hour and 45 minutes, I took a booster dose of half a cap of Amanita muscaria, as well as 2 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. Then, after about 2 hours and 30 minutes, or 2 hours and 45, I began to experience some mild closed-eye visions. It was like sitting on a big outdoor balcony with a 180-degree view of the Aurora Borealis. Gradually, the visions became more intense, much more colourful, and much more complex, with constantly changing abstract patterns. It was like watching multiple movie screens at once, being able to pay attention to all of them at once and note what was happening in each one of them. Sometimes all of the screens would meld to form one single image, and occasionally, figures of faces, which I initially thought of as being grotesque, menacing or perverse, were a little bit intimidating at first, but I knew that resisting these figures or trying to run from them would intensify the slight anxiety I first felt. So, I willingly accepted them, and I thought of them as being my friends rather than enemies, which caused me to smile. I thought of my smile as moving through space under a strobe light, like a river of undulating smiles which made me smile all the harder. I began to feel joy at knowing that I was under the influence and so much in control of it. I conceived of reaching out to touch the visions, and extended my arm upwards above my body while lying on my back, which was about 4 hours and 30 minutes after the initial dose. It was as if I dived right into the middle of all these marvellously coloured patterns and pieces of jewel-like light sources. They were inside of me now, making me feel happy, secure and warm. They filled me up, and I exploded into 1,000 whirling multicoloured galaxies, all sending off sparks of light. Yet, even though it exploded, I could stand and watch myself as a separate observer, even though I'd experienced that sensation of filling up and so joyfully exploding. The galaxies reconvened to reconstitute myself, and suddenly I conceived of a spectacular light source that began rapidly entering my body and exiting, back and forth, going faster and faster, and at times, it seemed to be facilitating inside and outside of my body, and at other times, I was facilitating inside and outside of it. And then, both were happening at the very same time. When written in black and white on paper, it doesn't quite make much sense. The sense of space and time were more fluid, kept going faster and faster, and as the frequency rose, I was able to hear a sound that rose in pitch to match this frequency. At last, the light and I were completely one, and then we began twirling and rotating through an ocean of colours. Our form changed constantly and would encompass the normal size of my body to perhaps 100 square miles back and forth. Throughout all of this, I'm aware of the constant process of change, renewal, and acceptance of the rapidity with which it was all happening. So much was happening in such a short time that time itself seemed to slow down. It was at this point I thought to myself, I think I'm pretty much peaking about now, which caused another huge smile and a sense of joy and satisfaction to wash over me. The fact that I was actually able to enjoy a hallucinogenic experience, especially after my rather strict upbringing, made me feel very pleased. It had been about 5 hours now since I took the first dose of mushrooms and seeds. I conceived that something sacred and otherworldly had entered me and that I had entered it. Some magisterial, majestic force that was making me lose my own identity, myself, repeatedly, over and over again. For some reason, it seemed natural to me to find myself over and over again, and to continually identify with it. As time passed, I became weary of it, and it dawned on me that perhaps I was being called upon by this force to relinquish possession of myself, to let go, and perhaps even to die. While the same visions of colours and vibration and frequencies were right in front of me and inside of me, it was as if I had a separate dream about riding a horse out in the country. I came to a wide and beautiful crystal clear stream and my horse drank from it. A very handsome elderly man, similar to Gandalf, with white hair and a big thick long white beard, rode up on his own beautiful white horse on the other side of the stream. His black eyes sparkled, and he smiled broadly at me with his deeply creased face, instantly winning my trust. He slowly crossed over to my side of the stream, holding my eyes with his steady gaze and smile. "Ride with me," he said. "You'll see, it'll be beautiful." With only slight hesitation, I began to ride with him, and it was now as if I had a trail partner, someone I could trust in and rely upon. The wonderful visions continued, only now I had someone to share them with, and that made me very happy. It dawned upon me that I had given myself up to death itself, and it was truly wonderful. Never had I been happier or felt more satisfied or complete than in that moment. It was so reassuring to think that this is what death is like. Thinking of death as a friend, a companion, a trail partner. This was such a refreshing thought for me. 7 hours after the initial dose, the visions began to weaken, and my thoughts became less compelling. Around the 8-hour mark, the last few flickers of colour in my vision had slipped away. I lay awake for an additional 4 hours after this, unable to sleep. And around the 12-hour mark, I finally drifted off, around 4:30 AM the next day. I had some fairly routine, unremarkable dreams. I plan to take the drugs earlier in the day next time, so I won't be up all night again. I slept until 1 in the afternoon and felt very mildly hungover, although nothing nearly as bad as a bad alcohol hangover. Also of note is that the mushrooms and seeds had a fairly rapid laxative effect. After 3 hours, I had a large bowel movement, rapidly followed by another liquid bowel movement. It was an extremely satisfying experience though, I must say, giving me several whole-body shivers, almost like having an orgasm. It almost made me laugh to think that it was similar to what a woman must feel when giving birth. While squatting on the bog, I got totally ensconced in watching some light patterns on the bathroom wall for a few minutes. It made me laugh when I realised what I was doing, sitting there with a wad of toilet paper in my hand and a dirty bum. All in all though, I must say that this was a fantastic, rewarding and growing experience. Up until 4 years ago, I hadn't done any hallucinogens since the mid-1970s as a late teen, early 20s lad. At that time, there was still a terrible stigma attached to it all, at least in my mind. I took LSD once under really poor circumstances and had quite the bad time. Mescaline was way more fun. It was about 4 years ago that I took morning glory seeds in Hawaiian baby woodrows, and I did this several times with somewhat unsatisfactory results. And after trying to figure out how to obtain illegal substances, recently heard about Amanita muscaria mushrooms and Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds. I got the mushrooms online. I think there may be some risk to ordering the mushrooms. Seems to be questionable legality to owning the dried versions of it. But thankfully, nothing happened with it this time at all, and hopefully never will. A Cavern of Jewels. A Hawaiian baby woodrow's Salvia divinorum and cannabis trip report by MDC. Posted to earwood.org September 20th, 2009. I used to trip on a very regular basis, but it had been over a year since I'd last tripped, and I wanted to trip again. I decided to start cultivating my own mushrooms for personal consumption again, but while waiting on that, ordered 2 new things I've always wanted to try but never have. I purchased 30 grams of dried Peruvian torch flesh and 10 seeds of Hawaiian baby woodrows. I decided to first try the Hawaiian baby woodrows the other day, and have yet to consume the Peruvian torch. I meticulously peeled the seeds and for further measure, wet them and rubbed them off anything else that I couldn't get with a knife point or fingernails alone. I let these dry overnight and the next morning crushed them in a garlic press. I then soaked the seeds in rather small amounts of distilled water for approximately 3 hours and ran a few errands. When I returned, I put some water on the stove and prepared 2 mugs of ginger green tea, one for prior to ingestion and one to immediately follow ingestion. I'd heard a number of complaints of serious stomach upset from the seeds and hoped the ginger would help ease any discomfort. I strained any large chunks of seed out of the extract, leaving a slightly gritty but clear liquid with a colour similar to a pale golden liquor. This I mixed with a good quantity of orange juice to help mask any potentially unpleasant flavour, which it did beautifully. In about 20 to 30 minutes I began feeling lethargic and experienced a pronounced pain in the stomach, but no nausea. I decided to go lay down in bed for a while to help calm my stomach and nerves. I lay with my eyes closed for almost the entire time and drifted in and out of dreamlike visions and distinct but mild closed-eye visuals. I cannot, at this moment, remember all that I witnessed, and of course at 10 seeds it was not the most visually intricate or distinct of visual phenomena, but it was very present indeed. I do remember a vast field of nothingness with points of white and blue light that was shifting between being stars and being blocks, emanating from the centre of a non-existent cross. That is to say, there were 4 fields of these regularly spaced lights with space between each field. I remember more intricate and far less describable visual patterning, which rippled like the surface of a lake. Colours were hard to describe, and more often left simply the impression of a colour, but I seemed to have the impression of many oranges, reds, greens, and blues. A number of odd images briefly flashed in my mind's eye, but were elusive and hard to identify, let alone describe. I slipped often between the closed-eye patterns and a dreamy state, where the effects were very psychedelic, but I still also felt quite tired, and haven't any idea whether I really kept falling asleep and actually dreaming for brief periods, or if I was simply having particularly strong visions. It wasn't like normal dreams I have, but neither was it anything at all like the normal visuals I've experienced of psychedelics before. The previous visions and experiences made up about the first 2 hours of the experience, which really surprised and excited me. Upon rising from this trance-like state, I felt no nausea but a continued pain in the gut, which didn't leave until the effects diminished entirely. While I didn't feel sick, I knew I must purge and went to the bathroom to do so and felt quite better afterwards. I was feeling exhilarated now, and the effects were still strong and reminded me very much of the feeling of mushrooms at acid, but I was to find the 2-hour come-up was to include the most intense effects I would receive from the seeds alone. I knew I had a long way to go and was unsure if the effects would keep increasing or taper away very, very slowly. I was aware I'd experienced a peak very early on, and decided to wait and find out. So I went to my living room, smoked a bong, and drank some water while watching Labyrinth. After the movie, I realised the marijuana made the experience more pleasant, but I had reached the highest level of intensity there would be and passed it for good. It had been quite a while since tripping, but I had some 10x Salvia divinorum extract left from a long while ago. My original experiences with Salvia were very positive and spiritual, but later on I began having only quite frightening trips which are hard to handle and caused me to go on a long, long time without using it. I suspected that being in an entirely fairly psychedelic state, it may be easier for me to take the transition into the other reality of Salvia and decide to test this hypothesis. I settled into bed, prepared a very small test it, just to give me a reminder of what a heavier experience would be like, to help me decide whether I really wanted to proceed with this. Upon smoking this tiny hit, I closed my eyes and noticed a definite but mild shift in consciousness to begin with, followed by very fluid and flowing visual patterning. I got some very real effects and handled the experience beautifully, and really enjoyed the lovely imagery and unusual mindset of the Salvia experience, mild though it was. As I returned to mostly normal reality, I decided in fact wished to proceed into a much more profound excursion, but still did not wish to overdo things. I put in a hit about twice as big as the previous one, but still a small hit. Upon smoking this and again closing my eyes, the visual patterning returned quite strongly and became a whirling tornado of patterns and colour. I began to lose any and all knowledge of my body and my life outside of this other dimension. My existence right now is purely spiritual and mental, a point of awareness and being with no name or face, but which surely could still see. The patterning wrapped itself around me, circling, and then split into an upper and lower portion, each spinning another way. The patterns quickly gave way to the more otherworldly space as I broke through and came into a physically different place altogether. I had the sense of rising, but rising through the earth into a cavern deep within the earth. This cavern was full of colours and intricate designs, and was inhabited by some sort of object containing an entity or entities, a multifaceted object with a machine-like exoskeleton, but with facets like shining jewels. Each facet seemed to be a face or eye, but it was unclear if every one was different or all the same entity. It spoke to me as one, welcoming me and calling me by name, reminding me who I was. Oddly, I was the one communicating telepathically, repeatedly stating that I'd returned. I take this to be a statement of humility and accomplishment simultaneously, as well as one of reverence. I feel as though the past few heavy trips had taken me to a hellish realm which was a form of punishment for misusing the substance, whereas initially I received wonderful visions of deities and witnessed spontaneous healing of a loved one, and was privy to what goes on behind the scenes. My statement and feeling of having returned was quite significant, I must say, implying not only that I'd returned, but that I'd learned from mistakes and wished to approach carefully and humbly now, and wished to learn what can be taught. As is usually the case with significant salvia trips, right as I was becoming reoriented in my new environment, I was pushed back down into normal reality, back into my head. My eyes snapped open, and I could see my room, but could not figure out yet who or where I was, and it took several minutes of lying there to reorient myself with ordinary reality. At first, I even felt as though I may have gone back to the wrong place, into someone else's head. In fact, I felt like my head was in the right place, but felt as if my body was being directly beneath my head standing upright, not in front of my head laying down as I could see this person doing. I felt my hand on my chest, but didn't know for sure if I was alone or not. Was it my hand, or even my chest? Could I be sure they were both mine? I could still sense the presence of the entity to the left of me, but could see nothing out of the ordinary. As I finally came to grips with everything, I looked at a clock. The 2 salvia trips had taken about 25 to 30 minutes. I kept waiting to come down completely from the salvia until I remembered that I had taken the Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds and would not return to baseline for probably another 4 hours at least. I spent a while just sitting outdoors on my balcony reflecting on the salvia trips and drinking water. I soon made some food for myself as it was the middle of the afternoon and I'd yet to even eat. After a while of just being still and quiet, I went back indoors and decided to watch some TV for a while and smoke some more bong hits. The very last effects were diminishing around 9.5 hours in, and I enjoyed a small drink of gin and a homebrew now that my stomach was feeling better. Sleep came easily later that night as well, and I felt well rested the next day. All in all, I'm actually quite surprised with the experience. I'm particularly surprised at the intensity of the trip during the come-up and the trance-like state I experienced initially. As mild as the rest of the trip was, and salvia, I was shocked at the effects I received initially. I was quite pleased with the effects of the HPWR, and noted remarkable mental clarity throughout the experience. I will definitely try these seeds again, both by themselves in a higher dose, and in the same dose in addition to some cubensis mushrooms. The Pusher of Universes, a Hawaiian baby woodrose and Salvia divinorum trip report by Psych Rick, posted at earwood.org January 14th, 2014. About 2 or more years ago, I started getting very interested in entheogens and medicinal botanicals. I've already vastly entered the realms of psychedelia and drugs. More recently though, I found a new respect for drugs and life in general. My experience with entheogens such as mushrooms, LSD, salvia, MDMA, LSA and hash have been crucial to my growth in spirituality and altered states. Other drugs I've experimented with but now avoid are pharmaceuticals like Xanax, Adderall, Valium, Oxycontin, etc., as well as alcohol, heroin, DXM or Robo. I found that treating the substance respectfully by creating experience with a well-planned set and setting is the best way to experience any drug, but mostly in my case entheogens and psychedelics. Which is what leads me to my latest experiment, with the Hawaiian baby woodrose seed and smoking salvia extract in the peak of my Hawaiian baby woodrose trip. Preparation. I grinded 10 seeds in a coffee grinder, then mixed them with some applesauce and enjoyed them. Onset. Within 45 minutes I noticed a pleasant tingling or light buzzing in my legs and head. I got a little cold in my house, so I decided to go on a walk for a bit. When I was walking, I felt a little bit cramping or pain in my stomach area emerge, so then sparked up my cannabis joint which immediately calmed any discomfort. After the joint and a half a mile walk, I started feeling alert and felt this pressure around my eyes. It wasn't unpleasant at all, but something that reminds me of when I do LSD. Energy bursts were creeping up at me anywhere from my inner thighs to my feet and head and body, so I decided to stroll on back home. Once I walked inside and took my shoes off, I quickly noticed an amazing amount of euphoria and bliss enter my consciousness, much like a wave of LSD but with no visuals. At this point, I sat relaxed on my couch and turned up some psychedelic music. Being a musician myself, I suddenly realised how amazing and deep the music sounded. I laid back and let the music and energy waves coexist in my sensory field. Closing my eyes, I saw green tunnels moving fast and eventually stopping at this huge neon green ball of light that was so vivid I knew it was a closed-eye visual. After about another hour and a half of exploring my closed-eye visuals, which were nowhere near mushrooms or LSD, but nonetheless very pleasant with the aid of music, I decided to take it up a few notches. I packed a nice-sized hit of Salvia 10X in my glass pipe, dimmed the lights, and began meditating, for I was not a beginner of the sacred herb and knew very well what Sally could do to a man. I then go on to acknowledge the power of Salvia divinorum and asked her to give me an insightful and not too intense experience since I was already tripping. I wanted to break through to the salvia dimensions, but I did not want to experience any turbulence along the way. With that said, I hit the pipe without letting the lighters stop burning the herb and took a huge hit, holding it in for over 30 seconds. By the time I blew out the hit, I saw my visual plane almost crack in time, and within 10 seconds I felt like I was being pushed really fast and squished next to other bodies of flesh. I was being pulled deep into the salvia world, with no idea what I was getting myself into. Finally, after what seemed 10 minutes, I felt as if the force pushing me relaxed, and I was able to vividly witness one huge archetypal image of multiple universes, including ours being organised and controlled by this pusher. My emotions were shocked with this feeling of being infused with this pusher that pulled me out of my dimension. It was as if time was truly no more, and had no thought of the normal plane we all experience on an everyday basis. My sole purpose right now was to move universes and spirits in correct alignment with me. Remember, I fused with the pusher archetype that pulled me into this realm. A vision of my infused form with this pusher entity was seen in an out-of-body experience-like view. It's hard to explain what its appearance really was, but I could most closely relate it to a caterpillar in a train and colourful images on its body in spirals around its aura. The vision lasted for a while, but slowly and surely was fading away, and slowly but surely I realised I was looking at my living room. I was cracking up when I realised I just came back from the salvia trip because I actually forgot I was a human. I was like, nah, no way. I actually forgot. After laying down and feeling the huge euphoric infusions of the afterglow of salvia and the LSA from the seeds, the salvia come down intensified my LSA effects for 2 hours, and I was literally getting these amazing visuals that felt cartoon-like, some breathing or moving and dancing qualities on surfaces. I noticed very bright lights and almost tracer-like images from lights in any form. The euphoria from the seeds was still waving in and out, and slowly the salvia afterglow was gone. I smoked another joint and realised after the salvia experience fully subsided that I was actually quite stimulated. I decided to take myself on a bike ride, and then went home and talked on the phone to close friends enthusiastically. A lot of research I've done for Hawaiian baby woodrows says that they are sedating for most people compared to the stimulating effects of LSD. I personally felt almost the same effects from LSD except the visuals and the intense spiritual talkative mindset. Overall, I must say that Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds were not that nauseating as I thought they'd be, but they were actually quite stimulating with a marked euphoria, energy burst, entactogenic qualities, very few open-eye visuals, more chance of simple fantasy or imaginative closed-eye visuals, and any discomfort from cramps were neutralised from cannabis. The euphoric mindset was perfect for inducing me into the salvia trance, but I strongly suggest you be careful because I noticed the salvia trip seemed to last a lot longer when I was on Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds compared to just stoned or baseline. I also recall feeling like I was in the experience a lot longer. It seemed a lifetime before my return to home base. So if you don't want to have a very long, in-depth salvia experience that can be quite intense, then do not do Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds first. But overall for me, it was the most unique and theogenic experience that I've had to date. The Highest of Highs. A Hawaiian baby woodrose and Salvia divinorum trip report by Cameron. Posted to earwid.org, December 5th, 2011. I have little experience with tripping on salvia, and no experience with tripping on LSD. I developed a bit of control with my salvia trips, so I thought I would take the leap of tripping for a great deal of time on a more powerful psychoactive drug. I crushed 10 seeds of HBWR and chewed them for about 2 minutes about 6:30 PM. Soon after, the first hour of my experience, I felt a warming sensation in my head. It was distinct enough to tell that this was not just wishful thinking, but that the seeds were doing something. During the course of that hour, every so often I would feel a flash of what seemed like insanity for less than half of a second. From what I'd heard about LSD experiences and the fact that LSA was very similar, I was expecting to have a very colourful and unique trip, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. After a half hour or so of this warming sensation and these brief glimpses of insanity, I thought I could help the LSA trip begin by using salvia. I sat at my desk and inhaled 2 very deep breaths of salvia, holding both breaths inside my lungs as long as I possibly could. In a matter of seconds, I was in a new mindset. I was still in my room, the TV was still on the same program, and for the most part everything in my room was how it should be, but the only exception was that I felt the presence of many beings in the room with me. I didn't question their lack of body and voice, but rather I just knew they were there. These beings have appeared in other salvia trips I've had. I often speak to them, and when I'm having a bad trip, I yell. When I'm having a bad trip, I tell the beings that I'm not going to give in and panic, because panicking is really what they want. After I regained my normal state of mind, the warming sensation was gone, and I began to feel a bit of nausea. I called my friend with whom I've previously used salvia and told him of these effects I was feeling. They were mild and I didn't have much to say. Still seemed intrigued though, because I'd mentioned the seed's capabilities in the past. So, concluding the conversation, he told me to call him if I felt anything more going forward. After about an hour or more of intense nausea, I started to experience a feeling of well-being. At first I assumed I was only feeling good because the nausea was subsiding, but I didn't want to lead myself on thinking that the seeds were beginning to take effect. After about 20 minutes of this feeling intensifying, I concluded that this was indeed effects from the seeds. This intense feeling lasted from about 9 PM until 3 AM. At the time I remember thinking to myself, euphoria, euphoria, euphoria. Although there were no visual hallucinations during this trip, my hearing became incredibly perceptive instead. There were 3 sounds in my room at the time: the TV, the ceiling fan, and the fan inside my laptop. I could hear each sound individually and incredibly accurately. Every so often, the very subtly volumed fan inside my laptop would stop running, and I would immediately take notice of it. The absence of this sound would make me feel completely different. My body seemed to keep releasing chemicals that heightened my mood, yet I felt 100% different. At about 1 AM, I really wanted to just go to sleep. My body felt completely drained of energy and my eyelids were very, very heavy. I went to the bathroom before I attempted to go to sleep like I always do. My mind was completely clear at the time, but I walked and moved as if I were drunk. Stumbling along the way, I made it to the bathroom. I looked into the mirror and my everlasting smile grew dramatically. The green rings in my eyes were a very thin hairline, while the rest was clouded by a deep black pupil. I laid my head down to rest, but realised that sleep was far from possible in spite of my incredible fatigue. My mind was just racing. I couldn't control the presence of song, nor could I subdue the tapping of my fingers to the beat. I began to grow frustrated with my active mind. I grew increasingly worried that these euphoric feelings would never cease, while at the same time I was still completely consumed in the happiness. At about 2 AM, the effects began to diminish, and I fell asleep a little after 3 AM. I was utterly exhausted, yet I laid in darkness for over 2 hours before falling asleep. My trip was characterised solely by intense euphoria. Over the course of the 6 hours, I thought about many things that would normally upset me, but my mood could not be altered. The smile on my face could not be wiped away whatsoever. I tried many times to hold a straight face, but I could not succeed for more than 10 seconds at a time. I've had many good days throughout my lifetime, but no moment could compare to what I felt every second of this trip. This was a kind of happiness that could not be achieved with chemical induction. One would think such an incredible experience would yield a hefty price, yet I felt no come down of any kind the following day. The only price I paid was about $20 for 50 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. Although I felt no visual hallucinations whatsoever like I'd actually expected, I do fully intend to repeat this experiment.
There is a witch in my room. A Datura and Morning Glory Trip report by Heinrich. A friend of mine found some Datura growing next to the library at our college. He picked it to give to his roommate who was interested in trying it. After reading the experiences online, he decided not to. I have regular piss tests thanks to the state of Maryland, so I was bored and looking for a new drug to try. I read that Datura was truly terrifying for many, and for some reason I really wanted to try it. After thinking about doing it for a few days, I decided on a Thursday night to eat around 50 seeds. After about 45 minutes and no effects, I ate 100 more, and then after 15 minutes, another 100. I was getting angry that I was having no effects. I was looking for the most terrifying drug experience and nothing was happening. After another half hour I started to feel a light buzz, and I found that everything felt lighter. I don't know what I was thinking or how intoxicated I actually was at that time, but I decided to eat 300 morning glory seeds that my friend had left over from experimenting with extracting LSA. About 20 minutes after eating the morning glory, I threw up, like I always do after eating them. We left my friend's room and went downstairs to mine, and we smoked a little bit of pot, and I found it impossible to use a bowl. After taking a few hits, I remembered the piss test that I would have, and started freaking the fuck out. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of going to jail. I kicked everyone out of my room, and suddenly the furniture in the room appeared to be floating 3 inches off the ground. I started seeing objects appear out of the floor and ceiling, and at first it was really fun. It felt like a normal LSA trip, but then the effects of the datura started. The things I was seeing in the ceiling started turning into violent scenes and faces in agony. I occasionally saw blood dripping from my ceiling. It was like the ceiling turned into a Saw movie. It took about 20 minutes for me to realise that it was just a hallucination, so I decided to turn the lights off to stop. This made the trip fun again for a while, and I lay down in my bed and tried to relax. I was alone now, and started feeling detached from everything in the world, and may have fallen asleep for a bit. Suddenly I began to feel intense anxiety for no reason, and when I looked in the corner of my room, I saw there was a woman there. I realised that she was a witch, and I was somewhat happy to see it, because I didn't believe it was a real theme of datura. The witch turned her head, and she had no face except for yellow eyes. This scared the shit out of me. Every time I looked away, she looked away, and after a few minutes of finding the courage to look at her again every few seconds, her eyes turned blood red. I wanted to get out of my room, but she was next to the door. I was trapped in my room because the window led to the roof where I knew I shouldn't go onto in my condition. I finally got up and turned the lights on and ran out of my room. First, when I got up to escape, I thought the witch was going to kill me. I also felt like I'd just woken up from a dream. I don't know if I was dreaming about the witch or not, but either way I left my room and didn't go back for 2.5 hours. I found my way outside and smoked a cigarette, and then I peered up at the sky and the moon had turned into a swastika. I was partially amazed and partially scared. When I looked away and looked back at the moon, it was gone, and ran when people walked by me. I kept asking them if they stole the moon and if the witch in my room was trying to kill me. After walking the halls and being incredibly frightened for 2.5 hours, I went back to my room to go to sleep. I wanted nothing more than to sleep the trip off and return to reality. When I turned the lights off, I immediately lay down in my bed and never looked into the witch's corner. I eventually fall asleep and had some of the craziest dreams I've ever had in my life. I sleep through the next day, continuing to have interesting dreams, and didn't feel right all day. I will not do datura again, and it really did not produce any desirable effects. My hallucinations were violence, blood, agony, witches and swastikas. It has been more than a month, and I still don't think I have ever completely recovered mentally.